there will be no showings done without an agreement being signed by the buyer. And most agents are too afraid to get you to sign an agreement, and so they won't do it. If an agent is willing to show you a house without signing an agreement, I would run for the hills. This is amazing. How many of you have either bought or sold some form of residential real estate in your lives? The residential real estate world completely changed in the last month. And you may or may not know about it, and I think every single person should know about it. And of all the things that everyone will tell you about, there's one topic that whatever they're saying is wrong and I'm right. And let me tell you why. Because about 9 weeks ago, I polled a lot of agents and brokerages around the country, and I asked them, hey, you got a bunch of these changes coming in, what are you guys doing? And most of them had no idea. And I was at an event with 350 leaders of real estate companies around the US, and I asked them, hey, how many of you have read this new settlement agreement that has been proposed because of these antitrust changes in the real estate business? 7 out of the 350 raised their hands. 7. So 7 leaders raised their hands out of 350 people. So you can imagine most people had no idea what was going on. So I was like, oh my gosh, I got to take this time to try and educate the industry and educate myself if we needed to know what was happening. So let me give you what the state was before. So if Bryce wanted to sell his home, right, Bryce is going to be like, hey, I want to sell my home, so he's going to interview some agents. So just give me a nod if this makes sense so far. Okay, interview some agents. So Daniel's like, hey, I'm going to be the agent. So Bryce hires Daniel, right? And what Daniel does, he negotiates a fee, a commission. And that commission is actually a weird commission, which most people don't understand. So generally, let's say it's 5%. Have you heard that number before, being 5 or 6%? Okay, so how that commission works, if you don't know about it, is some portion of that commission goes to Daniel, and the other portion of that commission goes to the broker that's representing the buyer. But if you think about it, that's kind of weird, because Bryce, as the seller, is paying Daniel 5%. Daniel's going to take his 5%, he's going to keep a little bit of it, say 2.5, and he's going to share the other 2.5 with the other broker. That does not happen in any industry anywhere around the world, because it's weird that Bryce has to pay Daniel, Daniel has to share commissions, Bryce has no way of actually paying Sharran directly. This is called cooperation compensation. And what the antitrust regulations were saying is that the real estate industry was price fixing, meaning Bryce, as the seller, did not negotiate the buyer commission. Bryce, as the seller, only negotiated the seller commission, and Daniel did whatever he wanted to fix my commission, which is why they wanted to break it up. And so the lesson number 1 in all of this is everything is exactly the same, it just looks and feels different. So that's lesson number 1. Give me like a nod if we're good with that. All right, here's number 2. The number 2 thing is when Bryce lists the home with Daniel, Daniel does something. He puts the home on something that the real estate agents call the MLS. If you've not heard of it, it's called the Multiple Listing Service, and it's a private Zillow for real estate agents only. So only Leo and only Stacy and only Chris and only Daniel have access to this thing called the MLS. And when they put the information on the MLS, all the agents can see all the data and everything associated with it. They're also bound by rules of ethics and compensation associated with it. And then that information goes to Zillow. Zillow does not get any information. Zillow has no information from anybody to anything. The only information that is provided by Daniel to the MLS. And that MLS syndicates out all the information. All right, good so far, right? The interesting part about the MLS is you may wonder, what is the job of the MLS? The job of the MLS was to do 2 things. Number 1, to protect what they call this cooperation compensation. So Daniel takes the listing, say it's 2.5%, he puts the home on the market for $1 million, and he says, hey, whoever comes to buy this home, the agent that brings him, we're going to offer 2.5% in commission to them. So he puts that number on the MLS. That means it's automatically agreed upon. They call it unilateral offers of compensation. So I, as the agent, don't have to negotiate my fee or anything like that. That's why buyer's agents, if you've heard them say, they'll say working with me is free. Have you heard some version of that? And that means that the seller's agent is actually compensating me. Good so far, all that. So because of that, that's what created this whole DOJ antitrust rules. So there's a few things that are new that you all need to know about, right? Now, the last part of this puzzle. Let's say I'm representing Mark and I'm the agent and I want to buy this house. So I tell Mark, hey man, we should go look at this house. And he's like, let's go. Mark is my friend. I'm the agent. We go look at the house. We start talking to the listing agent. And then we say, Mark's like, this is really great. I want to write an offer. I'm like, awesome. And so I write up this offer and I submit it. And then I get paid on whatever Bryce has agreed upon. That's how real estate has worked so far up until August 17th. So good on the current state of everything. All right, here's the new state of the world. The new state of the world has 3 big rules. So here's rule number 1. It's buyer representation is required, meaning if I talk to Mark and he says, yeah, I'm interested in seeing that house, I, as the agent representing the buyer, cannot show any homes to anybody without a written agreement in place. So if you want to see any home going forward, you have to sign an agreement. Before, you didn't have to. You have to sign an agreement. And that the only caveat around that is you can go to open houses without signing an agreement. So if you're working with Chris and Chris is like, hey, I want to see the home in Tampa, and Jonathan Bates is like, let's go see this home. Chris is like, bro, you got to sign this agreement. And that agreement essentially says, if the seller doesn't compensate me, you will. That's what agreement really says. That means that for some reason, if Bryce does not come out of pocket, which by the way, he can do whatever he wants, now if Jonathan hired Chris, Johnson's on the hook to pay Chris. That's freaking people out right now, but I'm going to show you how that's not an issue. Okay? Because that's number 1. You will have to sign some kind of agreement. Now you may say, what kind of agreement? There's various kinds of agreements. Jonathan may say, hey man, I don't know if I really want to see this house. Can you just show me this house? I'm happy to sign make sure that you and I are official in something. There's various types of agreements. There's one thing called a touring agreement, which just means I just met you, I don't know you, I have no idea if you're a serial killer or not, so I'm not going to work with you, but I'll still show you this house and then we can talk about it. So there are agreements with less teeth on them that you can also have, but there will be no showings done without an agreement being signed by the buyer. It will not happen. If an agent is willing to show you a house without signing an agreement, I would run for the hills. It is a state law. You cannot do it. And most agents are too afraid to get you to sign an agreement, and so they won't do it. In fact, because of the lawsuit, what the plaintiffs are doing right now is they're sending secret shoppers to actually convince agents to show the homes without an agreement so that they can sue them again. So that's happening right now. So I'll tell you, anyone live in LA by any chance? All right, in Los Angeles, the agents are so afraid to ask their clients to sign agreements, especially since the homes are on average $3 million to $10 million, whatever, higher in price. They're like, oh, I can't ask a higher price buyer to sign a what they call a buyer representation agreement, so they don't ask at all. So no one is asking for this in LA. They're all going to get in super, super hot water. So this is not a joke. And if you get asked to sign a buyer representation agreement, know that this is coming and it's okay. All right, good so far. That's number 1.
Policing. You gonna throw me in real estate jail? Is that a real thing?
No, there's criminal penalties to this stuff. It's state law.
I mean, are they going to pursue that? Have you seen any, I know it's early.
Yeah, so if we as a brokerage find out that Nikolai is not doing that, I will fire him on the spot. This also happened 30 days ago, so this is all fairly new, but this is that's why I want all of you to know this, because to me, if someone is willing to cut corners on a rule, they're going to cut corners on other rules. So just be ultra careful about this, right?
Is it just California so far?
Good question. It is all 50 states.
Okay.
It is every market in the country. Okay. So it's everywhere. So there's only one market, which is in somewhere in Seattle. Anyone live in Seattle? Okay, somewhere in Seattle, there's one MLS jurisdiction that does not kind of comply with these rules. But what the state of Washington is going to do is they already made this a state law, so it doesn't matter. They have to do it anyway. So it's all 50 states right now. So number 1, you're going to have to sign some buyer agreement, some version of it. Either may be a lighter one or a more in-depth one before you actually see a home, that not including open houses. Number 1. Here's number 2. When Bryce hired Daniel, Bryce said, hey, this is a 5% commission that I'm agreeing to, the total that Bryce is going to pay. And Daniel's like, I'm going to, This is like, now I'm like the Comedy Central guy. Or just,
All right, Matt Rife.
oh man, Matt Rife is so good. So what Bryce was doing was he was agreeing to a 5% commission, right? And the 2.5%, so Daniel's going to keep 2.5 and offer 2.5. The only way the world, as in all the other buyer agents know that a commission is being offered is when Daniel puts that on the MLS. Otherwise, nobody knows that that's being offered. Here's rule number 2. There's no offers of compensation to be made on the MLS going forward. Therefore, Daniel cannot put any offer of compensation to a buyer agent on the MLS. The buyer's agents right now have no idea what they're going to get compensated. So far, it was working with me is free. Now it's like, I have no idea how I'm going to get paid or not.
It's not in the agreement.
Say again?
It's not listed in the agreement.
You mean in the listing agreement? It can be, but the states, I'll talk about that in 1 second. Yeah, that's good. So Bryce is going to sign an agreement in a traditional way with Daniel saying, hey, I'm willing to pay 5%. And then Daniel says, cool, my fee is 2.5%. We're going to offer 2.5% to the other side. That mechanism is gone. Some states, all of these rules are done on a state-by-state basis. Some states actually allow for Bryce to still agree to pay the 5%. So Daniel still makes 2.5%, and he can tell every buyer agent that he's talking to, hey, my seller is still willing to pay you the 2.5%. I just can't put it on the MLS. That is possible, right? And that's okay. There's some states right now, almost 2/3 of them, that are too scared to do that. But the states are too chicken to do that. Therefore, they're going to get into more policy issues. State of California is one of the only states that have said you cannot say it anywhere. And so you may say, well, how does a buyer agent get incentivized to bring an actual buyer? So if I was representing Mark, I would call Daniel and I would say, hey, Daniel, my client wants to see the home. Is it still available? And Daniel would say, yes, it is. And I go, hey, can you tell me about the home, blah, blah, blah. He's going to tell me the info about the home. Then I'm going to say, hey, is your client willing to offer buyer agent compensation? And then Daniel will say one of two things. He'll say, my client's open to paying buyer representation compensation based on the terms of the offer, which means whatever you want, write it up as part of the offer and send it to me. I'm not going to tell you anything. Or he may say, my client's willing to pay this. He's already agreed to pay 1%, 2%, 2.5%, whatever. He's going to give you one of those two things. Either of those statements are okay because as long as Bryce directs Daniel to tell me anything, it's totally okay. But he cannot advertise it on the MLS. He can advertise it on a sign, he can advertise it on email, but he cannot put it on the MLS. Good so far? So the interesting part is, I'll give you a crazy example. State of Texas. State of Texas has these new, and so all of the real estate business came out with these new forms to help facilitate all of this. They all suck. They're terrible. Like, they're so bad. And because one set of policies want to do one thing, they interpret these rules differently. The crazy example is the state of Texas created these new forms based on these new rules. And they did it a certain way. Well, then the Austin Board of Realtors, which is the association that Leo was talking about, essentially said the state of Texas is terrible, we're going to make our own forms. So think about that. Because state of Texas made one set of forms, Austin Board of Realtors made another set of forms that are completely different. So the state of Texas has a form that says you can actually write the listing commission inside the listing agreement. The Austin Board of Realtors says you can't. And I'm actually super hopeful that over the next kind of 3-4 months, by the beginning of the year, everyone's going to get to a pretty stable place of this. But right now, this is painful. But the only thing you need to know is there's no offers of compensation to be made on the MLS. That's number 2. Bryce.
So this doesn't apply if you're not getting represented. If you're the buyer and you're not getting represented, you can still go out there and not work with a realtor and put in offers.
That is correct. So Bryce asked a question. He says, what happens for people that are not represented? Doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want.
Okay. And does this apply to commercial as well as?
Good question. Right now, it's only residential and only residential purchases and sales. It does not apply to any commercial because commercial already works like this. And it does not apply to any rentals. So rentals don't matter and commercial doesn't matter.
What about land?
I would think that land is not a residential purchase or sale, so land, this would not matter to land. Yeah.
So, like, are you familiar with flat rate MLS? Yeah, so flat rate MLS, you can put it on there, and all you're trying to do is find a buyer's agent to come with you. But if you can't list on the MLS the percentage, I think it would maybe affect land in that aspect.
You cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no MLS, like MLSs right now have removed the cooperation compensation field. In fact, I tell agents, do not use the words cooperation compensation. There's no more cooperation. So number one, there's going to be a buyer representation agreement. Number two, no offers of compensation on the MLS. Number three is anything that is done in the contract. So what Daniel's going to tell me is, hey, my client's willing to pay whatever, just go ahead and put it in the contract. So I write an offer on behalf of Mark and I say, hey, we want to buy this home for $1 million, but we expect the seller to compensate me 2.5%. Now, since Mark and I have already signed an agreement, say for 2.5%, if Bryce is only willing to pay me directly 2%, Mark's on the hook for the other 0.5%. And he may say, well, I don't want to do that, and then we have a negotiation around it. But if he already signed an agreement, he owes me that unless I'm willing to let go of that in some way. That's why signing this buyer representation agreement is important. So what most buyer agents are going to do right now is instead of saying, hey, let me just meet you at the house and show you the house, they're going to say, hey, let's meet at a Starbucks. I want to run you through how all of this works, because they want to show you their value, which is the right thing to do, to explain to you how the process works. Good so far? Okay. Those are, so the three main rules. There's buyer representation required, just like there's seller representation in place. No offers of compensation to be made on the MLS, and everything to be put in the offer. So there's no more unilateral offers of compensation, while buyer's agents don't work for free anymore. So you'll start to see this. The crazy part is, I'm going to make up this number, but 70% of operating agents in the United States right now don't understand this. And they're like, I don't understand this. How does this work? So if you're a part of any agent group, which you should not be a part of, by the way, but if you are, you will see just agents freaking out because it's completely changed their worlds. And so you should know how this works, just in case you're talking to a buyer and or an agent and they ask you to sign something, you know why they're making you do that. What did I miss? Chris, David.
So Sharran, as us non-agents,
Huh?
what should we do? What is the best thing
Yeah.
for ourselves?
Yeah, so if you're talking to this is a really good question, and I was going to get to that. If you're talking to an agent, the thing that I would ask is, hey, can you please explain how you're working in this new rule environment? Just ask them that. Can you please explain how you're working in this new rule environment? That will show you two things. One, if they actually understand the new rule environment and can explain this to you. And two, if they say, hey, based on this, we used to do it this way, but we have a new process. If they can't actually show you that, you know that they have not adapted to this process in any way. Foundationally, hey, based on this new environment, what can you walk me through your process? That's all you need to ask, because that will show you whether they've adapted to it or not.
Should it be 6%, 5%?
Oh.
Should we pay for the buyer's thing? What should we say? What is the appropriate thing for terms? What protects the seller or the buyer?
Okay, so really good. So David asked a great question, and so I have a flip, and I've told a few of you this. I had a flip, and this was right around August 17th when the changes were happening. And most of the agents told me, hey, Sharran, if you do not turn around and offer, publicize, and advertise buyer agent compensation, you won't get any buyers to your listings. So I told our listing agent, I said, hey, here's a flip. Here's what I want you to do. Don't put anything on the MLS. Put 0. He's like, Sharran, you're telling them that you're not offering anything for buyer agent compensation. I'm like, put 0, they will call you. And he's like, well, when they call me, can I tell them you're going to offer? I'm like, no, you don't say that. What you say is, my seller is open to paying buyer agent compensation based on the terms of the offer. He's like, well, they're going to throw a hissy fit. I'm like, let him throw a hissy fit. And so we got 6 offers. 2 were contingent on the sale of their home. So we dropped that. So we had 4 left. Out of the 4 that we got, it ranged from 1% to 2.5%. So they self-negotiated with themselves. And I want agents to get paid. I'm in the agents getting paid industry. So I wanted them to get paid. So all I did was I countered the purchase price above, and I had everybody come up. But it's amazing to me that they were not able, like I as the buyer agent was not able to talk to Mark and convince him that I can actually get that from the seller, or I actually deserve that commission. If I can't do that, I'm actually saying, hey, I'll just take the 1%, come work with me. So what was free is now 1%. So what I would offer is, number one is only agree upon the listing agent commission at the table. and then tell the agent that anything that comes from the buyer agent, hey, I'm open to paying X or Y, but don't commit to it. Let it all become a term of the offer. And then you take all of those as a negotiating point. I would not commit to anything.
Sean, can we talk about the aspect of concessions too?
Yeah, great, Kelly. So there's 4 ways in which a buyer agent gets paid. So in this scenario, in the olden world, Bryce agreed to commission with Daniel. Daniel would share the commission with me. That's the old world. In the new world, there's 4 ways in which a buyer agent can get paid. Way number 1, the seller, Bryce, pays the buyer agent directly. Way number 2, Mark, the buyer, pays the buyer agent directly. Way number 3, seller and buyer kind of agree to paying a little bit of both for it to come to me. That's the combo. And the 4th way is what Kelly talked about. It's called concessions. And what the concessions mean is Mark says, hey, I'll pay you $1.1 million for $1 million house, making this up. And with that, I want you to leave your furniture in there. I want you to pay for the roof. And I also want you to pay for buyer agent commission. So Bryce says, hey, that's cool. I'm going to give you a $100,000 concession, conceptually, back in the transaction. 1.1 million paid, $100,000 concession, conceptually. So then this $100,000 goes back to the buyer. Now the buyer can take this concession and then pay the buyer agent. Concession is just an adjustment of terms. There's a lot of ways in which concessions happen. It's sometimes for a credit for closing costs earlier. It's sometimes for keeping the furniture. It can be to anything, but seller and buyer have to agree on that. Would you define it differently? Is that okay? So the concessions are the way in which most of this is going to happen, where you say what they don't want anymore is they don't want the listing agent and buyer agent cooperating. There's no more listing agent and buyer agent commission sharing. It either has to be seller-directed compensation or buyer-directed compensation. There's no more agent-to-agent compensation.
Sounds like a great idea.
Correct. It's actually, but for the next 6 months, it's freaking everyone out because they're not used to this. And the buyer agent now has to talk to Mark and have this extra conversation where the original conversation was way easier. I will tell you, most buyers, right, when they'll call, like Mark will call an agent and say, hey, can I go see this house? The agent will be like, great, I'll meet you there. That's what used to happen. Now it's like, hey, that sounds great. Which other homes do you want to see? Let's meet at a Starbucks. Let's go through this process. That's a little weird that we have to go through it. But it's really good, by the way, because it provides representation. In the old world, there was no representation, which means that Mark could show up at this open house and Daniel could take Mark away as my client because there was no representation. Now representation is in place, which helps everybody. Great question. So Nick asked a question which essentially says, hey, I originally agreed to paying the 2.5% and something happened. I don't want to do that anymore. So that's what everything is based on the contract. So we would write an agreement saying we want to buy the house. We would write an agreement saying, hey, don't even worry about it, Bryce, my client would pay for it. And then in the middle of the contract, we have these contingency periods. You can always back out. So as long as all contingencies are not removed, you can negotiate out of the deal. Yeah. Daniel asked, are you able to negotiate with the seller the fee? The interesting part is that was always available. You could, the interesting part about real estate is it optically felt like there was price fixing, but there was no price fixing because at the end of the day, when this closing statement happened when we bought this house, everything is listed on it. There's nothing hidden. So everything's a negotiation. So if Bryce says, hey Daniel, I'm selling 10 homes with you, I'm only going to do 1% on all these 10 homes. You can either take it or pound sand. You're open to doing that. The crazy part is that agreement is not shown with anybody. You don't have to tell anybody what the fee is. And now you don't have to put it on the MLS either. So any fee that Bryce offers me doesn't have to be anywhere either. And so everything's negotiable. If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Right? So I think it varies. The cool part there is when I'm talking to a listing agent, I'm like, hey, listen, let's say push comes to shove, I want to pay a total of 5%. If push comes to shove, you're at 2.5%, I'm willing to pay another 2.5%. But if they want another $20,000, hey, you got to find a way to make it work for me because I'm committing to this number. So what I like to tell the agent is I just like to be open about my math. Hey, I'm willing to pay up to this. If something happens, you have to help me negotiate that. Either you negotiate it or you kick something from your side in. Yeah. It also varies on the price point because like David's $4 million house that he has for fun where he throws darts, right? is like probably needs more marketing than somebody's $350,000 house. So if they need more marketing and that home's probably going to sit on the market a little longer than a $350,000 house based on the market, so they need more marketing, carrying costs, et cetera, associated with that. So that will go a little higher. So if you're listing a $12 million house, you're probably paying more just because that person has to float the marketing for that home much more. I'll tell you my perspective on this. So there was a great question, and Daniel said, would you recommend bypassing one of the agents to either list your home yourself or buy your home yourself? And this is my perspective being in this industry. I bought, I don't know, over 2,000 homes myself. In all 2,000 purchases and all 2,000 sales, for every single transaction, I've worked with an agent. I will never, ever do a transaction without an agent, ever. It is the cost of doing business, but they are your protection mechanism. There is zero reason to do it. Like, you can get information around it, but so now our job is to find the best agent that delivers that value. I know you just did it, which is awesome. I would not, there is no situation, even if it's a layup, where I would not work with an agent. I cannot, and I can do it if I wanted to. There's zero situation. Yeah, that's just my perspective, by the way. If I, the seller, was not offering a fee, does that prevent or disincentivize agents from showing that house? So it used to so far, because clearly we know stories of agents saying, it not for everybody. Stacy, no matter what, she would say, I don't care what's being offered, I'm going to show this if it's the right fit for my client. But there are agents, even in the old world, who if the fee was not being offered, they're like, well, it's not being offered, I'm not even going to, like, even if it's the right fit for Mark, I'm not going to show it. That is called steering. Steering is illegal, right? And so this new rule actually prevents steering, because if I call Daniel and I say, hey, is your seller willing to pay buyer agent compensation? Daniel is going to say, hey, our seller is open to paying buyer agent compensation based on the terms of the offer. He's not giving me any number. And based on that, I have to write in that offer. So therefore, since I don't know the number, I can't steer. So we're trying, like the main rule for this was to avoid steering.